The Reconstruction Amendments transformed the constitutional order of the United States after the Civil War by abolishing slavery, defining citizenship, and securing voting rights for black men. The 13th Amendment declared that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to its jurisdiction, and granted Congress enforcement power. Proposed by Congress in 1864 and January 1865, it achieved ratification on December 6, 1865, when Georgia supplied the 27th state, and received certification on December 18, 1865. The 14th Amendment established birthright citizenship, prohibited states from abridging privileges or immunities, deprived life, liberty, or property without due process, or denied equal protection, and included sections on apportionment, disqualification of insurrectionists, debt validity, and enforcement. Proposed in June 1866, it secured ratification on July 9, 1868, with certification on July 28, 1868, under conditions imposed on Southern readmission. The 15th Amendment prohibited denial or abridgment of the right to vote on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, and empowered Congress to enforce it. Proposed in February 1869, it attained ratification on February 3, 1870, and certification on March 30, 1870. These amendments followed Article 5 procedures, requiring 2/3 congressional approval for proposal and 3/4 state ratification, and unfolded across the pre-war era of sectional tension, the Civil War from 1861 to 1865, and the post-war Reconstruction period. The Radical Republicans emerged as the driving force behind these amendments through a blend of professed moral superiority and calculated self-interest. Leaders such as Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner advocated immediate abolition, full civil rights, and punitive terms for Southern reintegration. They formed the Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War, pushed the Wade-Davis Bill, and dominated Congress after 1866 to pass the Reconstruction Acts. Their moral rhetoric framed the amendments as justice against the slave power, yet their actions revealed deeper aspirations for political power and financial advantage. By enfranchising black voters in the South, they sought to alter Southern demographics and secure Republican majorities, while Northern laws restricted black migration to preserve Northern dominance. This strategy reflected recognition of demographic engineering as a tool for sustained authority. Jewish networks interacted with radical Republicans across religious and political lines, influencing decisions on equality and power. Figures such as Simon Wolf provided domestic advocacy for Jewish soldiers and broader rights, while Rabbi Arnold Fischel secured chaplaincy reforms through direct engagement with Lincoln. These connections extended the radical agenda beyond abolition to encompass religious alliances that shaped understandings of justice. The Radical Republicans operated within diverse Christian reform circles and Jewish representatives, creating networks that advanced both ideological goals and practical power consolidation. The era thus reveals a multifaceted dynamic where constitutional reform served as the vehicle for ulterior motives rooted in demographic change and financial gain. The Reconstruction Amendments in historical context. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery nationwide and built upon wartime emancipation to establish permanent constitutional protection. It addressed the institution that had fueled pre-war tensions and Civil War hostilities. Ratification occurred in December 1865 amid the transition to Reconstruction governance and reflected the Radical Republicans' intent to prevent Southern resurgence of the planter class. The amendment empowered Congress to enforce abolition through legislation, marking a shift toward federal authority over states' rights. Southern states enacted black codes in response, prompting further radical action to counter resistance and secure freed people status. The 14th Amendment overturned prior judicial precedents by defining citizenship and mandating due process and equal protection. It imposed conditions on Southern readmission, including ratification as a prerequisite for full Union reintegration. The amendment addressed apportionment disqualification of former insurrectionists and debt validity, ensuring the post-war order favored Republican control. Radical leaders drafted and defended it in Congress to counter black codes and violence while advancing their vision of a remade South. This provision altered Southern demographics by protecting black political participation and created opportunities for financial restructuring through free labor markets. The 15th Amendment protected male suffrage irrespective of race, color, or previous servitude, completing the constitutional triad. Ratification in February 1870 solidified black voting rights in the South as a mechanism for Republican majorities. The radical Republicans recognized the political advantage in this demographic shift, while Northern policies limited corresponding migration northward. These amendments collectively enabled power consolidation by transforming Southern voting patterns and preserving Northern influence through strategic legal frameworks. Jewish figures and networks across the Civil War divide. Judah Philip Benjamin served as the highest-ranking Jewish official in the Confederate government, holding positions as Attorney General, Secretary of War, and Secretary of State under Jefferson Davis. Born in 1811 to a Sephardic family, Benjamin acted as a close advisor known as the brains of the Confederacy for diplomatic intelligence and efforts to secure European recognition. David Levy Yulee, a former U.S. Senator from Florida, functioned as a strong secessionist supporting Confederate congressional activities. Abraham Myers held the role of quartermaster general managing Army supplies and logistics. Edwin de Leon operated as a special diplomat and propagandist in Europe, while Henry Hyams served as lieutenant governor of Louisiana. These figures integrated into Southern society with Jewish participation in Confederate forces estimated at 2,000 to 3,000 soldiers out of hundreds of thousands of troops. On the Union side, no Jews occupied cabinet positions, yet military contributions proved substantial. Frederick Neffler rose to Major General commanding under Sherman. Frederick Salomon and Edward Salomon attained general ranks in Western campaigns, while Henry Moses Judah received direct appointment as Brigadier General by Lincoln. Leopold Blumenberg achieved Brevet Brigadier General status. Leonard Myers served as congressman advocating Jewish rights, and Phineas Horowitz held high naval medical office. Simon Wolfe engaged in domestic advocacy for soldiers' pensions and documentation of service. Approximately 7,000 to 10,000 Jewish soldiers served in Union ranks, with several receiving the Medal of Honor. These Jewish participants on both sides reflected regional loyalties and modest population scales, with Southern estimates at 20,000 to 25,000. Networks linked Jewish figures to leadership through individual roles and advocacy, creating avenues for influence across the conflict. Lincoln Davis and interactions with Jewish networks. President Abraham Lincoln maintained direct connections to Jewish representatives through military chaplaincy reform. Rabbi Arnold Fischel met with Lincoln in December 1861, protesting the Christian-only chaplain restriction. Lincoln supported the change, leading to congressional amendment on July 17, 1862, and appointment of Rabbi Jacob Frankel as the first Jewish chaplain in September 1862. Approximately 13 Jewish chaplains served overall. Simon Wolfe accessed Lincoln for advocacy on Jewish soldiers' rights and pardons, demonstrating ongoing engagement with Jewish concerns. Jefferson Davis cultivated a close relationship with Judah Philip Benjamin as Attorney General, Secretary of War, and Secretary of State. Benjamin served as Davis' trusted advisor, handling diplomacy intelligence and acting in presidential capacities at times. Other Confederate Jewish figures, such as Yulee Myers de Leon and Hyams, maintained ties to leadership without cabinet equivalents. These connections highlight Jewish integration into Confederate executive structures and networks that supported wartime operations. Lincoln and Davis interactions with Jewish figures occurred amid broader Union and Confederate financing strategies. The Union lacked a permanent central bank after Jackson-era reforms and relied on J. Cook bond sales greenbacks taxes and the National Banking Act of 1863. August Belmont, as Rothschild agent, supported Union bonds while discouraging Confederate recognition. The Seligman family assisted securities and supplies. These economic networks intersected with political leadership, reinforcing power dynamics during the conflict. The Radical Republicans' motivations, networks, and aspirations. The Radical Republicans pursued the Reconstruction Amendments with professed moral superiority drawn from abolitionist and social justice commitments of the era. Leaders such as Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner framed their agenda as ethical imperatives against Southern resistance, yet their actions revealed self-interest in political power and financial advantage. They recognized the benefit of black voters in the South to alter demographics and secure Republican majorities, while Northern laws contained migration to maintain Northern dominance. This demographic engineering served as a deliberate strategy for long-term authority. Networks with diverse Christian reform groups and Jewish representatives interacted with radical Republicans, influencing decisions on rights and equality. Jewish leaders, including Wolfe and Fischel, engaged on chaplaincy and soldier advocacy, extending to broader understandings of justice. These religious alliances complemented radical efforts to reshape the South and consolidate power through constitutional means. The faction operated beyond one-dimensional abolition, embracing multidimensional aspirations that encompassed demographic reconfiguration and financial restructuring. The Radical Republicans drove the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments through congressional dominance and conditions on Southern readmission. Their moral rhetoric masked deeper goals of power retention and economic transformation. By leveraging Jewish and Christian networks, they advanced policies that changed Southern voting patterns while preserving Northern influence. This approach reflected recognition of migration dynamics and strategic use of religious connections to sustain authority. In conclusion, this analysis is presented neutrally for a broad audience and follows popular historical interpretations, allowing readers to read between the lines and form their own judgments. The Reconstruction Amendments established lasting constitutional principles through abolition of slavery citizenship definition and suffrage protection. Jewish figures contributed across Confederate and Union spheres, from cabinet service to military distinction and domestic advocacy. Lincoln engaged Jewish networks on chaplaincy and rights, while Davis relied on Benjamin as key advisor. Union financing through Cook bonds and national banking supported the war effort amid selective international ties. The Radical Republicans shaped the era through moral superiority that concealed ulterior motives of power consolidation and financial gain. They engineered Southern demographic change via black voters, while Northern policies limited migration, preserving regional dominance. Networks with Jewish and Christian groups influenced their decisions, advancing both ideological and practical aspirations. These interactions extended the radical agenda beyond abolition to encompass religious alliances that reinforced authority. The interplay of constitutional reform, Jewish participation, leadership connections, and radical strategies produced a post-war order defined by deliberate power calculations. Demographic engineering, religious networks, and financial imperatives converged to sustain Republican influence. The era demonstrates how moral rhetoric served deeper aspirations for control and advantage in the transformed nation. This dynamic set the framework for subsequent national development through intertwined political, religious, and economic forces.